The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Legacy Hotel was thick enough to taste. A heady cocktail of vintage perfume, ambition, and the cloying sweetness of 1,000 white roses. It clung to the back of the throat, a physical manifestation of the suffocating opulence that defined the Global Humanitarian Progress Gala. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of curated perfection men in bespoke tuxedos with smiles as sharp as their suit creases, and women in designer gowns that whispered of fortunes spent on a single night's transient beauty. Tonight, this world belonged to Dr. Eris Thorne. From her seat at the head table, the room seemed to shimmer, a distorted reflection in the polished surface of the award that sat before her, the Vanguard Prize for Ethical Innovation. It was the culmination of a decade of relentless work, a symbol of her life's mission, her revolutionary bio-integrated platform. Aegis promised to democratize medical diagnostics, making life-saving technology accessible to the world's most vulnerable populations. It was more than an algorithm. It was a testament to her belief that science should serve humanity, not profit. Eris smoothed the silk of her midnight blue gown, a concession to the demands of the evening. She was a creature of sterile labs and quiet archives, more comfortable in a lab coat than haute couture. But tonight, she understood, was about performance. It was about reassuring the wealthy patrons that their donations were fueling progress, that their capital was being transmuted into conscience. Nervous, a smooth voice purred beside her. She turned to face Julian Vance, the evening's primary sponsor and the man whose tech empire, Vance Industries, was a behemoth of modern innovation. He was a paradox of calculated charisma, with a smile that could disarm world leaders and eyes that held the cold, unwavering focus of a predator. He was handsome in the way of classical statues, flawless, imposing, and utterly devoid of warmth. Anticipatory, Eris corrected gently, her voice a low, steady counterpoint to the room's buzzing energy. Of course, Julian said, his smile widening. He lifted his champagne flute in a small salute. A well-deserved moment. Your work, it's truly transformative. A legacy in the making. There was an undercurrent to his words she couldn't quite place, a faint dissonance in the symphony of praise. She had known Julian for years, a professional acquaintance on the periphery of her world. His company had even provided some of the initial seed funding for her research, a fact he never missed an opportunity to mention. And now, the master of ceremonies boomed from the stage, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. It is my distinct honor to present this year's Vanguard Prize, a mind of singular brilliance, a heart of profound compassion. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Eris Thorne. A wave of polite, powerful applause washed over her. Eris rose, her composure a carefully constructed shield. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, a weight of expectation and scrutiny. She saw her mentor, Dr. Anya Sharma, beaming from a nearby table, her expression a mixture of pride and affection. Eris offered her a small, grateful smile before turning toward the stage. The walk felt impossibly long, the plush carpet seeming to pull at her heels. The stage lights were blinding, reducing the glittering audience to a collection of indistinct silhouettes. She reached the podium, its polished wood cool beneath her fingertips. She took a breath, preparing to deliver the speech she had rehearsed until the words felt like a part of her. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and steady. "To the committee, to my team, to everyone who believed in the simple idea that a person's health should not be dictated by their wealth." A sharp electronic tone cut through her words. Eris paused, frowning, on the massive twin screens flanking the stage. Her presentation slide, a simple, elegant graphic of the Aegis platform, flickered and vanished. It was replaced by a sterile, Corporate document. Its dense text highlighted in aggressive red. Confusion rippled through the audience. A low murmur began to build. Eris looked toward the tech booth, but her eyes were drawn to a figure moving with unnerving calm toward the center of the stage. It was Julian Vance. He held a small tablet, and, with a tap of his finger, the document on the screen scrolled. "My apologies for the interruption," Julian said into the microphone, his voice a silken blade that sliced through the growing unease. "But I'm afraid there is a matter of integrity that must be addressed before we celebrate any further." The silence that followed was absolute. A sudden, crushing void. The flash of a camera cut through the dimness like a gunshot. Eris stood frozen at the podium, a deer caught in the headlights of a disaster she hadn't seen coming. "Dr. Thorne's work is indeed revolutionary," Julian continued, his tone dripping with false regret. "Revolutionary in its audacity, in its deception." He tapped the tablet again. The screens behind Eris filled with spreadsheets, email chains, and data logs her data, but twisted, manipulated. Sentences were taken out of context. Numbers were altered. Entire columns of results were fabricated to look like damning proof of fraud. For months, my own internal audit team has been investigating discrepancies in the Aegis platform's trial data, Vance announced, his voice resonating with manufactured authority. "What we found was a systematic, deliberate pattern of data falsification, a scheme designed to accelerate FDA approval and secure funding by promising results that were, to put it mildly, a fantasy." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The flashes of cameras became a frantic, blinding strobe. Eris felt the blood drain from her face, yet her expression remained a mask of placid neutrality. Inside, her mind was a whirlwind of denial and shock. It was impossible. Her data was clean, meticulously documented, rigorously peer-reviewed. This was a lie, a monstrous, elaborate lie. "She has not created a miracle cure," Vance declared, his voice rising with theatrical gravitas as he turned to face Eris directly. "She has created an illusion built on the hopes of the sick and the trust of investors like myself. She has betrayed her oath, her colleagues, and the very spirit of scientific inquiry." He took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. The public performance fell away, and for a split second, she saw the raw, chilling hatred beneath. He lowered his voice, a venomous whisper meant only for her, yet amplified by the microphone to the horrified room. "It seems, Doctor," he said, the words precise and cold, "that you've learned nothing about the devastating consequences of a single, careless mistake. Some things, you see, you can never outrun." The phrase hit her like a physical blow. A single, careless mistake. It was a ghost, a whisper from a rainy night 2 decades ago, a shard of a memory she kept buried under layers of academic achievement and professional discipline. A memory only 2 people in this room shared. Her composure, her ironclad shield, finally cracked not on her face, but deep within her soul. The room, the lights, the accusations, all of it faded into a dull roar. The scent of roses was suddenly suffocating, thick with the phantom smell of wet asphalt and lilies. The Vanguard Prize sat gleaming on the podium, a mockery of everything she had worked for. The weight of 1,000 gazes pressed down on her, no longer adoring, but suspicious, judgmental. They were the jury in a trial she didn't even know she was facing, and the verdict had already been delivered. With a stillness that was more terrifying than any outburst, Eris turned away from the microphone. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply walked. Her steps were even and measured as she descended the stairs from the stage. Her back ramrod straight, The sea of beautiful, powerful people parted before her, their faces a gallery of shock, pity, and morbid fascination. She walked through them, an island of chilling calm in a storm of her own destruction, her mind already shifting from the shock of the wound to the cold, hard certainty of what would come next. This was not an attack. It was a declaration of war, and Eris Thorne had never walked away from a fight. The days that followed were a systematic dismantling of her life. The gala was merely the execution. The fallout was the slow, meticulous dismemberment. Her name, once synonymous with integrity and brilliance, became a toxic asset. News headlines screamed of the scandal Vanguard Prize recipient, accused of massive data fraud. The Thorne Deception Tech's fallen star. Aegis Platform, a house of cards, says Vance Industries. Her university, a bastion of academic tradition where she had been a celebrated faculty member, acted with brutal efficiency. An email arrived, cold and impersonal, informing her of an immediate, unpaid suspension pending a full investigation by the Ethics Committee. Her lab was sealed, the frosted glass door now bearing a stark red sign that read, "No unauthorized entry." Behind it lay a decade of her life's work, now impounded, inaccessible, a crime scene in which she was the sole suspect. Her graduate students were reassigned, their emails to her a mixture of confusion, fear, and carefully worded disappointment. They were distancing themselves, as one might step away from a contagious disease. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of minimalist order, became a gilded cage. It was a high-rise fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city, a testament to her success. Now, the sprawling skyline seemed to mock her, a world she was no longer a part of. The silence within its walls was absolute, broken only by the incessant ping of her phone, a torrent of vitriol from strangers on social media, coldly formal notices from legal teams, and the pity-laced messages from one-time colleagues who were now so terribly sorry to hear the news. She moved through the space like a ghost, her actions precise and methodical. She brewed coffee, arranged books that she didn't read, and stared at the complex equations scrawled on the whiteboard in her study. They were elegant, truthful, the language of a reality that seemed to have no bearing on her own. Julian Vance had not just attacked her reputation, he had rewritten reality itself, and the world had accepted his version without question. A week after the gala, a package arrived. It contained the Vanguard Prize, its polished surface now feeling like a cruel joke. There was no note. None was needed. The only voice of unwavering support came from Dr. Anya Sharma. Anya, with her sharp wit and even sharper mind, had been the head of the ethics department for 20 years before her retirement. She had mentored Eris since she was a graduate student, seeing in her a rare combination of intellectual rigor and profound empathy. "They're fools, Eris," Anya said over the phone, her voice crackling with indignation. "A pack of hyenas smelling blood. Vance hands them a perfectly packaged scandal, and they fall over themselves to devour it. Due process has been replaced by public relations." "He was so convincing." "Anya," Eris said, her voice a low monotone. She stood at her window, watching the distant, indifferent flow of traffic. The documents looked real. The data, it was my work, but poisoned. Of course it looked real. Julian Vance doesn't do things by halves. His power isn't just in his wealth. It's in his control of the narrative. He builds worlds, Eris, and he can just as easily tear them down. There was a pause. "This is personal. You know that, don't you? The way he spoke to you on that stage, that wasn't business." Eris closed her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I know." She didn't elaborate, and Anya didn't press. Some secrets were too heavy to be shared, even with a trusted friend. The summons for the Ethics Committee hearing arrived a few days later. It was to be held in the university's oldest building, in a wood-paneled room designed to convey a sense of gravitas and unimpeachable authority. Aris knew it for what it was, a stage for her official immolation. She spent the days leading up to it in a state of suspended animation, her mind a cold, clear engine of logic. Emotion was a luxury she could not afford. She compiled her own data, her original, untainted research, printing out every chart, every graph, every raw data log. She prepared a defense that was meticulous, logical, and irrefutable. It was the only way she knew how to fight with facts, with truth. On the morning of the hearing, she dressed not in the somber suits of an academic, but in a tailored sheath dress of stark white. It was a deliberate choice, a symbol of the clarity and purity of her work. She wore no jewelry save for a simple, thin watch. Her hair was pulled back in a severe knot. Her face was a pale, composed mask. The hearing room was as oppressive as she had imagined. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the space, its surface reflecting the distorted faces of the committee members like a dark pool. Dean Hallstrom, a man whose career was built on avoiding controversy, sat at its head. The air was stale with the scent of old paper and fear. Julian Vance was not there, but his presence was palpable. Two lawyers from his corporate counsel sat at the far end of the table, their expensive suits a form of armor. They radiated an aura of bored, invincible power. "Dr. Thorne," Dean Hallstrom began, his voice heavy with a practiced solemnity, "we are here to review the serious allegations brought against you and your research. This is a matter of the utmost gravity for the university's reputation." For 2 hours, they dissected her life's work. Vance's lawyers presented their evidence with cool detachment. They spoke of ethical breaches and fraudulent conduct as if discussing a quarterly earnings report. The committee members, a collection of tenured professors from various departments, listened with grim faces. Most of them avoided her gaze. They had already reached their verdict. This was merely the formality of sentencing. When it was her turn to speak, Aris laid out her defense with chilling precision. She presented her original data, explaining the rigorous protocols, the triple-blind studies, the independent verifications. She walked them through the digital signatures and timestamps that proved her records were unaltered. She showed them, point by point, how the evidence presented by Vance's team had been digitally manipulated, a subtle shift in a decimal point here, a reordering of data columns there. "The evidence against me is not just a misinterpretation," she concluded, her voice unwavering. "It is a fabrication, a sophisticated and malicious forgery." She looked into the faces of the committee members, searching for a flicker of understanding, a spark of intellectual curiosity. She found none. They looked tired, uncomfortable, and eager for it to be over. They were not scientists seeking truth. They were administrators managing risk. Professor Albright, a biologist whose own work bordered on the pedestrian, cleared his throat. "Dr. Thorne, while your explanation is detailed, the evidence presented by Vance Industries is compelling. Their forensics team is world-renowned. It seems more plausible that these timestamps you speak of could have been altered by you to cover your tracks." The absurdity of the accusation was breathtaking. It was a perfect, closed loop of logic. Any proof of her innocence was simply further proof of her cunning. The deliberation was a sham, lasting less than 20 minutes. Dean Hallstrom returned, his face a mask of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dr. Thorne," he announced, the words falling like stones in the silent room, "the committee has found that there is substantial evidence of gross ethical misconduct and data fraud, effective immediately. Your tenure is revoked. Your academic credentials are rescinded. And you are permanently barred from any affiliation with this university. All publications bearing your name will be officially retracted. Each word was a nail in the coffin of her career. Revoked, rescinded, barred, retracted. They were erasing her. Eris felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. She had expected this. She had known the truth was irrelevant in a room where power had already spoken. She gathered her papers, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The thick stack of her meticulously prepared defense felt impossibly heavy in her hands. It was the truth, and it was worthless. As she walked out of the room, she passed Vance's lawyers. One of them, a man with silver hair and a crocodile smile, offered her a nod of mock sympathy. "A shame," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. So much potential. Eris didn't grace him with a response. She walked down the hallowed, empty halls of the university, her heels clicking a steady, defiant rhythm on the marble floors. They had taken her name, her career, her life's work. They had left her with nothing. They thought they had won. They didn't understand. When you strip a person of everything they have to lose, you haven't broken them. You have made them free. And you have made them dangerous. The first step in a war is to understand the terrain. For Eris, that meant retreating to the one place where the variables were her own, her apartment. It became her command center, the whiteboard in her study, once filled with complex biostatistical models, was wiped clean. In its place, she began to map out the structure of Julian Vance's empire. Not the public-facing org charts, but the hidden architecture of PowerShell corporations, offshore holdings, political alliances, and the intricate web of data that flowed between them. She knew she couldn't do it alone. Her expertise was in the tangible world of biology and ethics, not the ethereal realm of digital ghosts and firewalls. There was only one person she knew who could navigate that world. A man who moved through code the way she moved through cellular structures. Elias Kahn. He had been a brilliant, iconoclastic data scientist at the university, a rising star until he'd had his own run-in with Vance Industries. He had discovered a security flaw in one of their flagship software products and, following ethical disclosure protocols, had reported it to them. Vance's company had thanked him by burying the report, patenting his solution as their own, and then quietly blacklisting him from every major tech firm in the country. Elias had vanished from academia, taking a low-profile job doing IT for a small, non-profit library system. Eris found him in the library's basement, a cramped, windowless room filled with the hum of servers and the smell of aging paper. He was thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. But the same restless intelligence still burned in his gaze. He listened to her story without interruption, his expression shifting from detached curiosity to a grim, familiar recognition. "So the great white shark is still eating," he said when she finished, leaning back in his creaking office chair. "You got too close to his son. Eris, he doesn't share the light." "He didn't just eclipse me. Elias, he tried to extinguish me," she replied, her voice low and intense. "He used fabricated data to do it. I need someone who can find the original code, the digital breadcrumbs that prove the manipulation." Elias ran a hand over his tired face. "You're asking me to poke a bear that nearly mauled me to death. Vance's network security is legendary. It's a digital fortress guarded by Cerberus himself." "I know the risk," Eris said, leaning forward. "But you know as well as I do that he won't stop with me. This isn't just about my reputation. It's about a man who believes he is above the truth. We let him win, and the world becomes a little darker." She paused, her eyes meeting his. And it would be a chance to finally hold him accountable for what he did to you. The last part hit its mark. A flicker of the old, defiant fire returned to Elias's eyes. He built a career on my work, he muttered, more to himself than to her. A whole security division. He was silent for a long moment, the server fans humming around them. Finally, he looked up. I'll need a secure, isolated system, a clean line, and a lot of coffee. Their alliance was forged in that dusty basement. Elias set up a ghost system in Eris's apartment, a network of firewalls and encrypted servers that left no digital footprint. Her home, once a symbol of her isolation, was transformed into a nerve center. Days bled into nights as they worked. Eris would analyze financial reports, patent filings, and corporate partnerships, identifying potential weaknesses and patterns of behavior. She was the strategist, mapping the battlefield. Elias was her covert operative, launching deep-dive probes into the labyrinthine networks of Vance Industries. Their first target was the data itself. Elias began a painstaking search for the raw, pre-manipulated data from the Aegis trials, which Vance's team had claimed to have acquired. It's like he scrubbed it from existence, Elias said, after a week of fruitless searching, rubbing his bleary eyes. The files he presented to the university were clean forgeries. No metadata, no version history. They were born on the day he needed them. While Elias hunted for digital ghosts, Eris tried to understand the why. Professional jealousy seemed too simple, too pedestrian for the scale of this attack. The key, she knew, was his parting shot at the gala, a single, careless mistake. The words haunted her, triggering fragmented images in her mind. Rain lashing against a windshield, the screech of tires on wet asphalt, the dizzying, sweet scent of lilies from a crushed bouquet on the passenger seat, shattered glass glittering like cruel stars. She would push the memories down, her body turning cold, her breath catching in her throat. It was a door in her mind she had kept locked for 20 years. One afternoon, seeking a break from the claustrophobic intensity of the apartment, she went to a small, independent coffee shop miles from her neighborhood. As she waited for her order, the bell on the door chimed, and a familiar, chilling presence filled the room. Julian Vance stood there, looking as effortlessly elegant in a cashmere sweater as he did in a tuxedo. He saw her, and a slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. He walked over to her, his movement smooth and predatory. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice a soft purr. "I do hope you're holding up. It must be so difficult when one's passion outpaces one's integrity." The microaggression was perfectly polished, a diamond-tipped drill designed to find a nerve. "Integrity is a concept you should spend some time researching." "Julian," Eris replied, her voice perfectly level. She met his gaze without flinching. His smile didn't falter. "Oh, I've made it my life's work. Accountability. You see, ensuring that people face the consequences of their actions." His eyes were cold, holding a depth of meaning that went far beyond her career. "It's a shame about your platform. So much promise, but some things are just fundamentally flawed from their conception. Irreparable." He was talking about her, not her work. The veiled threat was unmistakable. He bought his coffee and left, leaving Eris with a racing heart and the cold certainty that this vendetta was far deeper and darker than she could have imagined. The encounter galvanized her. That night, she sat with Elias. "Forget the Aegis data for a moment," she said. "I need you to find a police report. An accident, 20 years ago. A rural road in upstate New York." She gave him the date, a day seared into her memory. Elias, recognizing the shift in her tone, didn't ask questions. He just typed. An hour later, he found it, buried in a county's archaic digital archive. A single-page document, heavily redacted. Most of the names were blacked out, but two pieces of information were clear: the date and the name of one of the victims. Lily Vance, Julian's younger sister. The redacted page unlocked the sealed room in Eris's mind. The memories flooded back, no longer fragmented, but a coherent, horrifying narrative. It was their senior year of high school. Eris, Julian, and Lily had been inseparable, a trio bound by intellectual curiosity and youthful ambition. Lily was the artist, the free spirit who tempered Julian's intensity and Eris's focus. That night, after a party, they were driving home in a sudden, violent rainstorm. Eris was behind the wheel. A deer bolted onto the slick road. She swerved. The world became a kaleidoscope of spinning trees, shattering glass, and the sickening crunch of metal. When she woke up, she was in a hospital. Julian was in the room, his arm in a cast, his face a mask of cold fury. Lily, he told her, was gone. Eris was cleared of any wrongdoing. It was a tragic accident. The police had ruled. But Julian had never accepted it. He had looked at her at Lily's funeral and said nothing, but his eyes had passed a sentence of their own. After that, he had disappeared from her life, transferring to a different college, cutting all ties. She had assumed he had moved on. That time had healed the wound. She had been wrong. He hadn't moved on. He had been waiting. For 20 years. He had been building an empire, sharpening his weapons, all in preparation for this moment. His attack wasn't about data, or ethics, or professional rivalry. It was revenge, a cold, patient, and utterly devastating revenge for the death of his sister. "My God, Eris," Elias whispered, looking at her pale face in the glow of the monitor. "This whole thing, it's a tombstone. He's building a tombstone for his sister on the ruins of your life." The revelation was horrifying, but it was also clarifying. It transformed the fight. This was no longer just about clearing her name. It was about confronting a ghost that had haunted them both for 2 decades. The personal nature of the vendetta meant Vance would be relentless. But it also meant he had a weakness: his grief, his obsession. It was the source of his rage. And Eris knew, with the cold certainty of a strategist, that it could also be the key to his undoing. The battlefield had been defined. Understanding Vance's motive was like finding the key to a cipher. Suddenly, his actions, his words, his cold, meticulous cruelty, all made a terrible kind of sense. But knowledge was not power. Not yet. Vance had built his fortress on a foundation of grief, but its walls were made of wealth and influence, and Eris knew he would use them to crush any hint of resistance. The first counterattack came swiftly. Elias, emboldened by their discovery, had made a breakthrough. He had found a digital thread, a series of heavily encrypted financial transfers leading from a Vance Industries subsidiary to a shell corporation named Project Nightingale. "This is it. Eris," he'd said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "This is where he's hiding something. The encryption is military grade, but it's sloppy. It's got his ego all over it. He thinks no one would ever dare to look." But someone was watching them look. A day later, a sleek, black car parked across the street from Eris's building. It sat there for hours, a silent, menacing presence. That evening, a knock came at Elias's door. It wasn't a process server. It was 2 men in sharp suits who didn't introduce themselves. They simply handed him an envelope. Inside was not a legal document, but a single, high-resolution photograph of his daughter playing in a schoolyard, taken that afternoon from a distance. There was no note, The message was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. Elias arrived at Eris's apartment pale and shaking, the photograph clutched in his hand. "He knows," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "He knows we're digging. Eris, this has gone too far. This isn't just about code and data anymore. My family." "He's trying to isolate me," Eris said, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. But she kept her voice steady. "For Elias's sake. That's his strategy. He did it in the academic world, and now he's doing it to us. He wants you to run, so I'll be alone and helpless." "Maybe I should," Elias shot back, his fear turning to anger. "What are we even doing? We're two people against $1 trillion corporation and a CEO with a personal vendetta. This is unwinnable." Eris walked to the window and looked down at the black car, still parked like a vulture, waiting for something to die. She thought of Anya, who had called earlier to tell her that a major grant for her old department had been anonymously and inexplicably pulled, a grant with ties to a Vance-owned foundation. He was closing the net, systematically cutting off her every lifeline. This was the moment. The point where she could retreat, accept her erasure, and disappear into a quiet life of anonymity. It would be the safe choice, the sane choice. But then she thought of Lily. She remembered her laughter, her fierce loyalty, the way she could see the beauty in things others overlooked. And she thought of the lie she had carried for 20 years, a weight that had shaped the very contours of her life. Vance's revenge was built on a distorted truth, and letting him win meant that distortion would become the only truth that remained. She turned back to Elias. "He's overplaying his hand," she said, her voice filled with a new, hard-edged conviction. Men like Vance, men who believe they are untouchable, they become arrogant. They leave trails. That sloppiness you found in the encryption for Project Nightingale. That's his hubris. The threat against your daughter. That's his desperation. He's afraid of what we'll find. She took the photograph from Elias's trembling hand. "We don't stop," she said. "We get smarter. We go darker. And we make absolutely certain that when we strike, it's a killing blow. We give him no chance to retaliate, because his entire empire will have already turned to dust." Her resolve steadied him. The fire returned to his eyes, now alloyed with a cold anger of his own. "Okay," he said, his voice low. "Okay. No more poking. It's time to break down the door." Their strategy shifted from quiet infiltration to planning a full-scale assault. The target was obvious: Vance's annual shareholder meeting. Scheduled in 3 weeks, it was his grandest stage. A globally live-streamed event where he would announce a monumental merger with a European pharmaceutical giant. The merger was his magnum opus, the deal that would make him not just a billionaire, but a kingmaker in global health policy. It was the peak of his power. It would be the perfect place for his fall. While Elias worked to find a way into Vance's central servers, Eris reached out to Anya. She met her mentor in a quiet university library, a place of whispering archives and intellectual ghosts. She laid out everything: the accident, Lily, Vance's vendetta. Anya listened, her expression growing more grave with each word. "I knew it was personal," she said softly when Eris had finished. "But this is a tragedy worthy of the Greeks." She looked at Eris, her eyes full of a fierce, protective light. "He has pushed you to the brink, my dear. He has left you no choice but to become the weapon he fears you are." Anya, using her decades of contacts, made a call to a trusted friend, a retired detective who had worked the county where the accident occurred. She asked him to find the original, unredacted case file, not the digitized, sanitized version, but the physical paper file, tucked away in some forgotten evidence locker. 2 weeks before the shareholder meeting. Elias breached the firewall. "I'm in," he whispered, his face illuminated by cascading lines of code. "Aris, you're not going to believe this." Project Nightingale wasn't just a shell corporation for moving money. It was the hub of a massive criminal conspiracy. Vance, in his rush to finalize the merger, had been systematically manipulating the clinical trial data for his company's new flagship drug. He was burying evidence of dangerous side effects and inflating efficacy rates to guarantee regulatory approval and inflate his company's valuation before the deal closed. The fraud was worth billions. It was the kind of crime that didn't just ruin careers. It sent people to prison for decades. "He accused me of the very crime he was committing," Aris said, the audacity of it leaving her breathless. It was the perfect cover. By destroying the world's leading bioethicist, he eliminated the one person who might have been credible enough to question his data. The evidence was damning: internal emails, falsified lab reports, secret audio recordings of meetings where Vance himself ordered the data to be streamlined. Elias downloaded everything, a mountain of digital proof that could dismantle Vance's empire piece by piece. The day before the meeting, the retired detective called Anya. He had found the file. Anya drove 3 hours to retrieve it, meeting him in a quiet diner. She scanned the faded, typewritten pages and sent them to Aris. Aris opened the file, her heart pounding. There it was, in black and white, the full, unredacted report. It listed 3 occupants in the vehicle: Julian Vance, Aris Thorne, and a third passenger, a girl from their school who had been sitting in the back seat. Her testimony was recorded. She had told the officer at the scene, through her tears, exactly what had happened. The report confirmed Aris's deepest, most guarded secret, a truth she had buried to protect a memory, to honor a final, frantic wish, a truth that was far more complex and devastating than Julian Vance, in his blind crusade for vengeance, could ever have imagined. She now held 2 weapons, each capable of total destruction. One would destroy Vance's empire, the other would shatter his soul. The shareholder meeting was less than 24 hours away. There would be no more running. The day of the shareholder meeting dawned gray and cold. The sky over the city, a sheet of brushed steel. The Vance Industries headquarters was a monument to corporate power, a 60-story needle of glass and obsidian that pierced the clouds. Today, it was a fortress. Security was tight, with cordons of black-suited guards checking credentials with an air of polite intimidation. The lobby hummed with the energy of 1,000 powerful people: investors, analysts, and journalists from every major global outlet. The air smelled of money and anticipation. Aris Thorne was invisible. She stood across the street, a ghost in a simple gray coat, her face obscured by a dark scarf and sunglasses. Beside her, Elias, dressed as a bike messenger, nervously adjusted the strap of the satchel slung across his chest. Inside, it was a laptop containing the digital keys to the kingdom. "The press pass is in the system," Elias murmured, his eyes scanning the building's entrance. "ID number 74B9. Name is Helen Croft, freelance journalist for a Swiss financial paper. The bio is thin, but it should hold up to a cursory check." "It will have to," Aris said, her voice calm. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the cold resolve that encased it. She had spent the morning transforming herself. Her hair was cut shorter, dyed a nondescript brown. Subtle makeup altered the lines of her face. She was no longer Dr. Aris Thorne, the disgraced academic. She was a nobody, and, in a place like this, being a nobody was the perfect camouflage. She crossed the street, melting into the river of dark suits flowing into the building. At the security checkpoint, a guard took her fake ID. He scanned the barcode. His eyes flicked from the photo to her face, then back again. For a heart-stopping second, she saw a flicker of doubt. "Purpose of your visit?" he asked, his tone flat. "Covering the merger announcement for the Finanz und Wirtschaft," she replied, her voice steady, the Swiss-German publication name rolling off her tongue, as if she'd said it 1,000 times. He grunted and handed the ID back. "Auditorium is on the top floor. Press section to the left." She was in. The auditorium was a theater of corporate worship. A stage, vast and minimalist, was dominated by a screen the size of a tennis court, displaying the Vance Industries logo. The seats were filled with the architects of the global economy. Aris found her assigned spot in the press gallery, a cramped row at the back, and took out a notebook. Playing the part, from her vantage point, she could see the entire room, the expectant faces all turned toward the stage. The lights dimmed. A sleek, produced video began to play. A montage of smiling children, dedicated scientists, and soaring stock charts, all set to an inspiring orchestral score. It was a masterclass in corporate propaganda. Then, to thunderous applause, Julian Vance walked onto the stage. He was radiant. He exuded an aura of absolute victory. He spoke of the future, of innovation, of a new era in global health that his merger would usher in. His voice was a hypnotic symphony of confidence and charisma. He was selling a beautiful, perfect lie, and the room was buying every word. Aris pulled out a small, encrypted device and typed a single, prearranged message, "Now." Across the city, in his basement command center, Elias saw the message and initiated the sequence. On stage, Julian was building to his crescendo. "This merger is more than a business transaction," he declared, his arms spread wide. "It is a promise to heal, to build, to create a better world for generations to come." The screen behind him was meant to display the signature of the European CEO, finalizing the deal. Instead, it flickered. For a split second, it went black. The room murmured in confusion. Julian's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. Then, the screen came back to life. But it wasn't the Vance logo that appeared. It was a single, stark white slide with black text, "A Presentation on Integrity," by Dr. Aris Thorne. A wave of shock rolled through the auditorium. Heads turned, searching. Julian froze, his face a mask of disbelief. And then, from the back of the room, a figure began to walk down the central aisle. It was Aris. She had shed her coat and scarf. She walked with a calm, deliberate purpose, her heels clicking on the polished floor, a sound that echoed in the stunned silence. Security guards started to move toward her, but they were too slow, too confused, before they could reach her. She was at the stage steps. She ascended them, not as an intruder, but as if she owned the space. "A compelling performance, Julian," Aris said, her voice amplified by the microphone she calmly took from the podium. It was clear, strong, and carried to every corner of the room and to the millions watching on the live stream. "But you seem to have forgotten a few key data points in your presentation." On the screen behind her, the title slide was replaced by an email. It was from Julian, addressed to his head of research. The subject line, "Streamline the Nightingale trial data." The body of the email was blunt. "Bury the adverse event reports. We need clean numbers for the merger valuation. Do it." Gasps and angry shouts erupted from the investors. Julian's face went white. "This is a lie." "A fabrication," he stammered, but his voice was drowned out by the rising chaos. "Is it?" Aris asked coolly. The screen changed again, displaying the falsified data from the clinical trial next to the real data Elias had recovered. The deception was stark. undeniable. Red flags showing a 30% increase in heart complications had been systematically erased. This isn't innovation. It's fraud. You were prepared to risk thousands of lives to inflate your company's stock price before this merger. She moved across the stage, her every step a judgment. You built your empire on lies, Julian. So it seems only fitting that we examine the greatest lie of all, the one you've been telling yourself for 20 years. The corporate data vanished. In its place appeared a grainy photo, a smiling teenage girl with bright, artistic eyes, Lily Vance. The room fell silent again. This was no longer about money. It was something deeper, more raw. You destroyed my life, Aris said, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity as she spoke directly to Julian. In the name of justice for your sister. You called me a careless murderer. You built this entire vendetta on the foundation of my guilt. Julian stared at the image of his sister, his composure finally shattering. You killed her, he whispered, his voice cracking. You were driving. Yes, Aris said. I was. But you've forgotten a key detail of that night. Julian, you've edited it out of your memory just as you edited your clinical data. The screen changed one last time. It showed a scan of the unredacted police report, a witness statement, circled in red. There was another passenger in the car, Julian. Someone you never mention. She was sitting right behind Lily. She told the police everything. She told them how Lily, in a moment of playful exuberance, had grabbed the steering wheel. The final truth landed in the silent room with the force of a physical impact. I wasn't the one who swerved. Julian. Lily was. She saw the deer and yanked the wheel as a joke. It was a tragic, foolish, teenage mistake that lasted less than a second. A single, careless mistake. When the car stopped spinning, she was gone. And in the moments before I lost consciousness, the last thing I did was what I thought a friend should do. I moved her from the driver's seat. I took the blame. She paused, letting the weight of 2 decades of silence fill the void. I did it to protect her memory, to let her rest in peace, not as the cause of a tragedy, but as its victim. I carried that for 20 years. My guilt was my penance. But your revenge, your righteous crusade, it was all built on a lie. The person you've been hunting all this time never existed. Julian Vance stood on the stage of his greatest triumph, a man hollowed out in front of the entire world. The truth had not set him free. It had annihilated him, his empire, his merger, his identity as an avenging brother, all of it turned to ash in a single, searing moment of public revelation. The auditorium was a storm of shouting journalists and panicked investors. Security finally reached the stage. But they didn't move toward Aris. They stood, uncertain, caught in the wreckage of a man's complete and utter collapse. Aris looked at Julian one last time, not with triumph, but with a profound, weary sadness. The war was over. There was nothing left to fight. She placed the microphone back on the podium and, with the same chilling calm with which she had entered, walked away. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The live stream had carried Aris's revelations to every corner of the financial world. Before she had even left the Vance Industries building, the company's stock had flatlined, triggering automatic trading halts. The multi-billion-dollar merger didn't just collapse, it evaporated, taking with it the careers of dozens of executives and the fortunes of thousands of investors. By nightfall, the SEC had frozen all of Vance Industries' assets. The Department of Justice had convened a grand jury. FBI agents, armed with warrants citing Aris's evidence, were raiding the corporate headquarters, carrying out box after box of documents. Julian Vance, the charismatic titan of industry, was filmed being led from his office in handcuffs, his face a gray, empty mask. He didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him on that stage, extinguished by a truth he could no longer deny. Eris watched it all from the quiet sanctuary of Anya's study. She had given a single, concise statement to the press, confirming the authenticity of the evidence and directing all further inquiries to the federal investigators. Then, she had disappeared, leaving the world to feast on the carcass of the empire she had slain. The media frenzy was relentless, painting her as a brilliant avenger, a corporate giant killer. She ignored it all. The victory felt hollow, the vindication tainted by the tragedy that lay at its heart. She had cleared her name, but she had also been forced to exhume a ghost, to lay bare the painful secret of Lily's final moments. There was no joy in it, only a profound sense of exhaustion. A week later, her own name was officially cleared. The university issued a groveling public apology, offering to reinstate her tenure and credentials with immediate effect. She politely declined. She could never go back to that world, could never again place her faith in institutions that valued reputation over truth. Her work, the Aegis platform, was released from its legal limbo. Another company, a rival of Vance's, acquired the technology and, in a gesture of goodwill, put Eris's entire original research team in charge of its development, ensuring her vision for equitable healthcare would finally be realized. She spent the following weeks in quiet reflection, processing the aftershocks of the war she had waged and won. She and Elias met one last time in the library basement where their alliance had begun. He was a new man, no longer haunted by the ghost of his stolen career. He had received multiple, lucrative job offers, but had decided instead to start his own cybersecurity firm, one founded on the principles of ethical transparency. "We did it, Eris," he said, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time she could remember. "We did," she agreed. "Thank you, Elias, for everything." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You gave me back my name. We're even." One crisp autumn morning, Eris drove upstate. She found the small, quiet cemetery where Lily was buried. The gravestone was simple, elegant, engraved with the words, "Lily Vance, a light extinguished too soon." Eris placed a bouquet of fresh lilies at its base, their sweet scent no longer a trigger for panic, but a fragrance of memory and peace. "I'm sorry it took me so long to tell the truth," she whispered to the cool stone. "I hope you can forgive me for all of it." She stayed for a long time, letting the quiet of the place seep into her, feeling the 20-year-old knot of guilt and silence finally begin to dissolve. Months passed. The legal battle surrounding Vance Industries raged on, a distant noise in a world Eris had left behind. Julian Vance had taken a plea deal, accepting a long prison sentence in exchange for his cooperation. He had faded from public view, a fallen king in a self-made prison of grief and lies. Then, one spring day, Eris Thorne stepped back into the world, but not in the way anyone expected. At a press conference held in a modest, rented hall, she made an announcement. The courts had awarded her a significant sum in damages from the Vance estate. She was using every penny of it, not to rebuild her own life, but to start a new foundation. The final image of her journey was not one of revenge, but of rebirth. She stood at a podium, not in a glittering ballroom or a sterile corporate auditorium, but at the opening ceremony for a new state-of-the-art research institute. Behind her, inscribed on a wall of brushed steel, was its name, the Lily Vance Foundation for Ethical Innovation. Her audience was not composed of billionaires and investors, but of bright, hopeful students, young scientists who were the inaugural recipients of the Foundation's grants. Her speech was not about victory or vindication, but about responsibility. "Science without a conscience is a dangerous weapon," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "And truth, without compassion, can be just as destructive. Our work, our purpose, must be to seek not just knowledge, but wisdom, to build, not empires, but bridges. We are here today to turn a legacy of pain into a legacy of progress, to ensure that the light of a brilliant young woman, extinguished too soon, can illuminate the path for generations to come." She looked out at the sea of young faces, and for the first time in a very long time, her smile was genuine, free of the shadows of the past. She had faced her ghost and won. She had taken the poison of one man's revenge and transmuted it into a cure, creating not an ending, but a new beginning, built on the solid ground of a hard-won truth.